It is easy to forget that Jesus was a person. When we sit in a sanctuary like this one and we take part in a service of worship like this one, when we hear someone like Doug read stories from the Gospels like he just did, it is easy to get caught up in the churchiness of it all. It's easy to get lost in the theology and the sacredness, and it's easy to forget that Jesus was a person and that the stories about his life are stories about a person doing person things. It's easy for us to lose sight of the fact that a lot of the time, Jesus was just another person like you and me, just another person trying to live his life and figure things out the same ways we do. Jesus had a family and a hometown and a favorite food and a way of walking people could recognize at a distance, and a group of friends just like us. He had a way of wearing his hair, and he had people he would rather not run into, and he had a tune stuck in his head sometimes. And his life unfolded in fits and starts the way our lives do, triumphs and disappointments and uncertainties and clarity, coming and going through his life just like they come and go through our lives. And so when we read the Gospels, for all their holiness and sanctity, we're reading stories of someone's life with all the moments that make up a life and all the little things that make up a person. The reading for today, the story we usually call the Transfiguration, that story is holy. That story is up there with any other story in the Bible in terms of what it tells us about what kind of God God is. But the story of the Transfiguration is also a story of a transfiguration, is also the story of a transformation of a person. It's the story of a moment in the life of a person when so many things clicked into place. It's the story of a day when some uncertain things started to become clear. We are afraid of those moments, aren't we? We are afraid of those moments of transfiguration, those moments of transformation, even as we crave them. It's scary to change, and it's scary to let the world see that the person that they see on the outside might not be just like the person we feel like on the inside. We fear moments of transformation and moments of transfiguration because they are times when we come out into the open, because they are times when we have to stop pretending a little bit, when we have to let go of something. Have you ever had to work up the courage to say something out loud that you had only ever said to yourself? Have you ever had to deny something about yourself that everyone else thought was true? Have you ever looked out over some horizon in your life knowing that once you went that way, you could never really go back again? Those moments are as frightening as they are necessary. Those moments are as scary as they are inevitable. We crave them even as we fear them. And those moments are what make us into the people we become. For Jesus, one of those moments of change happened on a hilltop. Jesus and 3 of his disciples went up onto a mountain to pray, and while they were there on that peak, something remarkable happened. Jesus' clothing became bright, the Gospel of Luke says, as bright as a flash of lightning, and his face changed in appearance. And soon alongside Jesus appeared 2 of the great heroes of the faith, Moses and Elijah. And the disciples noticed that the 3 of them, that Jesus and Moses and Elijah, the disciples noticed that the 3 of them were talking. And I think that this must have been one of those pivotal, looking out over the horizon kinds of moments in Jesus' life, because a couple of dozen verses later at the end of this chapter, the Gospel of Luke says that following the Transfiguration, Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, and he began to embrace his ultimate purpose. The Gospel says that after this moment, Jesus changed his direction. And so in that moment, standing there on that mountain in the presence of friends and heroes and in the presence of God, I think Jesus was being told, you are meant to become like one of these heroes. You are meant to become like Elijah. You are meant to become like Moses. You are not going to stay where you are, and you are not going to stay who you are right now. You are meant to become someone important for the people who will come after you. And Jesus embraced that change. Jesus embraced that purpose. Jesus' face not only changed, but Jesus' face turned toward the thing that he was being called to do. For Jesus, it happened that way. For others of us, it happens differently. I want to talk about something here that is not really mine to talk about, but I think that it's a story that needs to be told anyway. And this is a little sermon inside the sermon. This is a little soapbox that I'm going to climb up onto for just a moment. These days we hear a lot. We hear so much about trans people. Maybe you even hear so much about trans people that you're tired of hearing about it. You just groaned a little bit inside to hear me bring it up. But listen, while trans people have become for some a way to make a political point, while trans people have become for some a way to lash out at and punish people they don't agree with, well, trans people have become for some a means of taking vengeance. They have become for some cannon fodder in a culture war. Trans people are, and I want you to hear me, trans people are people. Just like we don't always think of Jesus as a person doing person things, these days we don't always talk about trans people as people who are doing people things, as people who are living people lives. We think about trans people as an issue. We talk about trans people as a problem. We write laws and we write executive orders in which we reinvent trans people as some kind of threat. But trans people are people who are doing people things. We should never lose sight of that. Trans people are people doing people things. They are trudging up mountains with their friends to wait on the arrival of God, and they are seeking transformation just like Jesus and just like the rest of us. Trans people are more than a talking point in someone else's Sunday morning show. And I'm talking about politics and politicians. Yes, of course, I'm talking about them. But hear me well, I'm not only talking about politics and politicians. You will notice that I have used the word we all along. Not they. We collectively are the ones who sometimes lose sight of the fact that trans people are people. And we have lost sight too. We have lost sight of the meaning of the story of the Transfiguration, which is that transformation and change are sacred, which is that we should expect that encounters with God will transform and transfigure us. We should expect that God is always calling us to become who we really are and who we are called to be. And so maybe, instead of thinking about trans people as an issue or a test case or a talking point or a way to score some points, maybe we should think about trans people the way we think about Jesus on the Mount of the Transfiguration, as people changed by the faithfulness and purpose that comes from understanding who God created them to be. Change is hard. We are afraid of transformation. It is scary to let go of one thing and seize something else. It is scary to look out over those horizons and to set your face towards something and to know that that is the direction of your transformation. I know that about myself. You know that about yourself, that it can be terrifying to find yourself at that moment of stepping out into something new, that it can fill you with fear to find yourself being transformed and transfigured. And here is what else I know. I know that I'm afraid of that kind of change and that I crave it. And you know that you are afraid of that kind of change and that you crave it. But also we know that about ourselves. The people in this community know it. We know that we are afraid of change, and we also know that we need it. We know that change is necessary. We know that we have to move over our new horizons if we ever want to become who we are called to be. Congregations are not so different from people. Congregations, like people, are born, and they grow, and they change, and they even die. Congregations, too, can find themselves at moments of decision, just like people. And congregations, too, can summon the courage to look out over horizons beyond which they cannot see. And congregations can decide to set their face in that direction anyway. Congregations can summon the same courage that Jesus summoned on the mountain of the Transfiguration, the courage to become something he had never been before in order to become the person he was always meant to be. And congregations can find the same courage that a trans person finds, the courage to transform from the person they have been appearing to be into the person they have always been and become the person they will always be. Change is every bit as scary for a congregation as it is for a person, but courage can find us too. Courage can come alongside us. Courage can give us the audacity to set out in a direction we have never traveled before. The story of the Transfiguration tells us something important about these moments of decision in our lives. The story of the Transfiguration tells us that meeting the future is not really ever about repudiating or rejecting the past. The story of the Transfiguration tells us that when we step into a process of transformation, the people we have been come alongside us for the journey toward the people we will become. As Jesus stood on the mountain that day, a person doing person things. And as Jesus' face and clothing began to shine with the light of a new day, Jesus probably wondered if by moving into the future, he would be forsaking the past. Jesus probably wondered whether the price of becoming would be that he would lose something of himself. And in that moment, as Jesus began to set his face toward the future, the past showed up. In that moment, as Jesus began to grasp who he would become, the heroes of his tradition came alongside him, the past came alongside him, and they blessed him on his journey. Moses and Elijah were there that day, I believe, to tell Jesus that it was okay for him to journey onward because the past would always travel with him. That was true for Jesus, and it's true for you and me. We always carry the past with us as we go. And even when we travel onward, we never really forsake the places and the people we've been. And it's true for congregations too, congregations like this one. As we travel onward, as we move into the future, we change and we transform, but the past always comes with us too. The past travels alongside us. We need not be anxious about losing who we have been when we are becoming who we were always meant to become. Jesus, our trans siblings, congregations, you, me, we are all people doing people things. Jesus, our trans siblings, congregations, you and me, we all pass through times of transformation. We can all expect to experience transfiguration. We are all called to move toward horizons beyond which we cannot see. Change is sacred. The journey is holy. The movement toward our purpose is part of what it means to be alive. Like Jesus, we can expect to be transformed. And like Jesus, we can remember that transformation is a sure sign of God's creative presence. And so when we see it, when we find ourselves in moments of transfiguration, when we find ourselves on mountaintops visited by light and friends and heroes, when we find ourselves moving toward a future we cannot yet know, when we see our transformations begin to take shape, we can know that God is near. Amen.